The clock showed 0444 on the morning of July 7, 1944. The location was the Tanapag Plain, stretching across northern Saipan in the Mariana Islands. Marine Artillery Observer Corporal James Wieland sat in the pre-dawn darkness, his pencil moving quickly across damp paper. The coordinates he was frantically recording would prove crucial in the hours ahead, potentially saving thousands of American lives before the sun rose again. Grid 164-203, he wrote urgently. Enemy force estimated at 4,000 plus approaching our position. This is no reconnaissance probe, requesting all available artillery batteries immediately. Through his field glasses, Wieland watched something that modern warfare was supposed to have made obsolete. Thousands of Japanese soldiers were assembling in formation for a massive human wave attack, a tactic belonging to another era. Officers raised their swords overhead, bayonets glinted as they were fixed to rifles. Behind the front ranks came the walking wounded, their heads wrapped in bloodied bandages, some being carried on stretchers by their comrades. All of them moving forward with grim determination toward what would become the largest Banzai charge in the entire Pacific War. What waited for them was something the Japanese commanders didn't understand. 23 miles of American artillery stretched across the island, 105mm howitzers, 155mm guns, 81mm mortars, and offshore, battleships and cruisers ready to add their devastating firepower to the coming onslaught. All of these weapons suddenly swung their barrels toward Grid 164-223, toward the valley where the Japanese were gathering. The American forces had created something unprecedented in military history, a sophisticated fire control system that could deliver more destructive force onto a single piece of terrain in 60 seconds than entire armies had possessed during World War I. Time-on-target fire missions, manually fused shells coordinated through fire direction centers that functioned like a symphony orchestra, with each artillery battery performing its role in perfect synchronization. This was the stark reality of industrial warfare against which the Japanese military doctrine of Gyokusai, the concept of shattering like a jewel, now seemed almost quaint. What had begun as shock tactics in China, where Japanese forces faced poorly equipped opponents, had hardened into almost religious conviction by 1944. But the Americans had learned something different. They had learned to kill with mathematics. The first brutal lesson had come at Guadalcanal in August of 1942. An elite Japanese detachment, 917 men from the 28th Infantry Regiment, had charged across a creek the Americans called Alligator Creek toward Marine positions. The Marines had called in their supporting artillery from the 11th Regiment. Over 800 Japanese soldiers died in a single night. The few who survived came back with accounts of something they'd never encountered before. Shells suddenly erupting from multiple directions simultaneously, creating a wall of explosions so overwhelming that courage alone couldn't penetrate it. By Tarawa in November 1943, the Americans had refined their approach even further. Fire direction centers now communicated through improved radio networks, using standardized procedures that allowed them to concentrate fire from multiple battalions within just 2 minutes. The Banzai charges that had shattered enemy lines in China were now being systematically annihilated by mathematical precision. The difference went deeper than mere technology. It represented a fundamental divide between two completely different approaches to warfare. Japanese artillery still operated on direct observation, with individual batteries firing independently. The Americans had constructed an integrated system that would have seemed like pure science fiction to military theorists just a handful of years earlier. By 1944, the American Fire Direction Center represented the cutting edge of applied mathematics. Artillery officers consulted graphical firing tables and plotting boards. They ran calculations on slide rules, accounting for temperature variations, wind speed, the wear on gun barrels, ammunition temperature, and even the rotation of the Earth itself. A properly trained FDC crew could compute a complete fire mission for multiple batteries in under 60 seconds. Major David Little, who commanded the 3rd Battalion of the 10th Marines on Saipan, later described the system in his official report. Every infantry company had a forward observer with direct radio and wire connections to the fire direction center. When they spotted enemy forces and called for fire, the center plotted the target on their firing chart. We calculated the firing data for each battery based on their specific position and then transmitted the orders. Within 90 seconds of the initial call, shells from multiple batteries were already in the air, all timed to strike at precisely the same moment. The Japanese possessed nothing remotely comparable to this system. Their artillery doctrine, inherited from French methods used during the First World War, emphasized direct fire and relied on individual battery action. Communication between observation posts and gun crews depended on runners carrying messages or operators waving signal flags. When observers existed at all, they had no radios. A Japanese artillery battery might require 15 minutes to engage a target. American gunners could engage that same target in 90 seconds. By July 6, 1944, the Japanese situation on Saipan had become utterly hopeless. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito commanded the remaining forces, now compressed into a small pocket in northern Saipan. The area measured barely 3 miles across. Of the 32,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors who had originally defended the island, fewer than 5,000 remained capable of combat. American forces surrounded them on 3 sides. The Pacific Ocean at their backs offered no escape. General Saito issued his final order, a document later discovered on his body. "Whether we attack or remain where we are, there is only death," he wrote. "Yet in death there is life. We must seize this moment to demonstrate the true spirit of Japanese manhood. I will advance with those who remain to strike one final blow against the American devils." Throughout July 6th, the Japanese organized for what would be their final assault. Every soldier capable of holding a weapon was assigned to an assault unit. The wounded who could still walk were placed in follow-up waves. Civilian Japanese, including women and teenagers, were handed bamboo spears and ordered to join the attack. Those too injured to walk were given grenades and told to wait for American soldiers to pass, then blow themselves up. The Americans sensed something coming. Intelligence officer Major James Coxwell had intercepted fragmentary Japanese radio messages that hinted at a final attack. More telling was that Japanese artillery had suddenly gone silent, suggesting they were saving their ammunition for one last barrage. Forward observers in the American lines reported strange movement in the Japanese positions after darkness fell. Lieutenant Colonel Justice Chambers commanded the 3rd Battalion of the 25th Marines. He positioned his troops that evening with extreme care, positioning his strongest units along the most likely approaches. Every forward observer had backup communication systems. He spoke to the artillery liaison officer and made certain every battery on the island stood ready. In his after-action report, he noted simply, "We all felt it. Tonight would be different." What the assembling Japanese forces couldn't have known was that they were about to walk directly into the most lethal killing system humanity had yet devised. The American artillery on Saipan represented overwhelming firepower organized according to principles of scientific precision. The arsenal included 4 artillery battalions equipped with 105mm howitzers, a total of 48 guns. 2 Marine artillery battalions carried 155mm howitzers, 24 guns total. 3 Army artillery battalions had 105mm howitzers, 36 guns. 1 Army artillery battalion operated 155mm guns, 12 pieces. Infantry battalions carried dozens of 81mm mortars. And offshore, 6 battleships and 8 cruisers stood ready to contribute their guns. All told, more than 150 artillery tubes stood ready, not even counting the mortars or the naval weapons. These batteries connected through multiple communication systems, primary radio networks overlaid with backup wirelines and emergency runners. Each infantry battalion deployed trained forward observers positioned to see enemy movements. Every battery had surveyed its exact position down to the inch. Every gun had registered on pre-planned targets. The entire network could concentrate its fire on a single target or engage multiple targets across the battlefield simultaneously. Colonel Louis Metzger commanded the 10th Marine Artillery Regiment. He had spent 3 weeks perfecting the fire plan for this island. His operations officer, Major Thomas Warner, had divided Saipan into numbered squares on a master grid map. Each battery had already calculated all the firing data necessary for every single square within its sector. When a forward observer called for fire on grid 164-223, every battery already knew the exact range and deflection needed. At precisely 04:45 hours on July 7, 1944, approximately 4,000 Japanese soldiers and armed civilians began their advance. Records from the National World War II Museum, based on official Marine Corps documentation, confirm this was indeed the largest Banzai charge ever launched during the Pacific War. Leading elements included what remained of the 136th Infantry Regiment from the 43rd Division, sailors from the destroyed Saipan Naval Base, and aircraft mechanics who scarcely knew how to fire a rifle. The wounded hobbled forward on crutches, driven by the determination to die with honor. They moved across the Tanapag Plain Valley toward a 500-yard gap between the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 105th Infantry Regiment, 27th Infantry Division. As they advanced, their voices rose together, "Banzai, Banzai, Banzai." The sound of thousands of men screaming the same word created an eerie echo that bounced off the surrounding hills, a sound that made even experienced Marines feel the weight of what was coming. Corporal Wieland, crouched in his observation post on a ridge overlooking the valley, was already transmitting. Fire mission, grid 164-223. Enemy infantry in the open, estimated regimental strength moving south. Requesting immediate suppression fire. The response came swiftly from the 10th Marines Fire Direction Center. Roger, grid 164-223. Time on target, all available batteries, splash in 90 seconds. What followed next was the direct result of 2 years of American refinement in coordinated artillery fire. Inside the Fire Direction Center, a carefully choreographed sequence of calculations unfolded. Personnel plotted the target grid on the master map. Using precision instruments, they measured distance and direction from each battery position. Corrections for wind and weather conditions were applied to every calculation. Time on target missions represented the highest achievement of artillery coordination. Rather than having each battery fire when ready, which would create a rolling barrage that gave defenders time to seek cover, this system required every battery to calculate when to fire so that all shells would strike at exactly the same instant. Batteries positioned farther away fired first. Those closer to the target held their fire slightly longer. The result was catastrophic. Dozens or even hundreds of shells would suddenly appear in the sky at the same moment, giving the enemy no time to react. At 04:47 hours, the sky above the advancing Japanese force erupted in flame and fury. The official Marine Corps history records that the initial barrage contained shells from 12 artillery battalions, supplemented by naval gunfire. The effect on the densely packed Japanese formation was immediate and devastating. In the first hour alone, supporting artillery from the 100th Infantry fired over 2,600 rounds. The manually set time fuses, though requiring greater skill than the proximity fuses developed later, proved devastatingly effective when handled by well-trained crews. Artillery gunners had spent days perfecting their fuse-cutting techniques, reducing the entire process to mere seconds. Still, the Japanese advanced. This was the nature of Banzai, to continue moving forward despite impossible odds. Survivors picked their way through the bodies of fallen comrades, still screaming, still driving forward. Banzai, Totsugeki, charge. Corporal Wieland continued his work, calling in adjustments to the barrage, dropped 200, left 100. Enemy infantry continuing to advance. Request repeat fire. What made American artillery in 1944 fundamentally different from all previous conflicts was the ability to maintain continuous adjusted fire while enemies were actively moving. Forward observers didn't simply call in a barrage and hope for the best. They watched where the shells landed, called in corrections, and guided the artillery fire through the advancing enemy formations. Fire direction centers had developed a specific system called ladder fire, perfected precisely for Banzai charges. As the Japanese advanced, artillery would fire a line of shells across their front. Then, systematically, the barrage would walk backward through their ranks, then forward again, then backward once more, like a giant scythe cutting through a wheat field. By 05:30 hours, The main Japanese assault had advanced less than 400 yards, and at a cost in lives that was almost incomprehensible. Bodies carpeted the valley floor. The wounded crawled over the dead, still trying to advance. Some groups took cover in ravines and defiles, only to have forward observers call in airbursts that turned these positions into death traps. As devastating as the artillery was, some Japanese soldiers inevitably pushed through. By 0600, scattered groups had reached the main defense line. The 105th Infantry Regiment bore the brunt of the assault. The two forward battalions would suffer 406 killed and 512 wounded, nearly 80% casualties according to National World War II Museum records. This was where the American integration of direct and indirect fire support showed its full potential. Every Marine Rifle Company had 60mm mortars, organic to its weapons platoon. Every battalion had 81mm mortars. These could engage targets too close for artillery. The danger close range where friendly fire became a risk. At 0615, the largest remaining group of Japanese soldiers, approximately 600 men, penetrated the American line and overran artillery positions of the 3rd Battalion, 10th Marines. The artillery crews removed firing locks from their howitzers and fortress infantry. Some batteries depressed their gun barrels and fired point-blank into the charging Japanese, using ricochet fire to bounce shells off the ground. As the battle raged, the Navy added its weight to the slaughter. The battleship USS Tennessee and the cruiser USS Louisville had been stationed offshore specifically to support the defense against night attacks. Their 14-inch and 8-inch guns could fire star shells for illumination and high-explosive rounds for destruction. Fire control parties could communicate directly with naval gunfire liaisons aboard the ships. When Japanese reserves were spotted forming for a second wave, the call went out. Naval gunfire requested, grid 159 215 troops in open. Official naval records show that USS Tennessee alone fired 293 rounds of 14-inch ammunition during the engagement, while USS Louisville contributed 322 rounds of 8-inch shells. By 0730, the band's eye charge had degenerated into isolated groups of Japanese soldiers trying to find any way through the American lines. The carefully planned human wave attack had been shattered by coordinated firepower. Small groups of 5 to 20 soldiers would periodically emerge from cover, scream banzai, and charge the nearest American position. The American artillery had shifted to harassing and interdiction fire, random barrages on likely assembly areas, and routes of movement to prevent the Japanese from reorganizing. Every few minutes, a valley or ravine would erupt in explosions as artillery denied the enemy any safe ground. The most tragic phase began around 0900, when Japanese wounded who couldn't walk began their own desperate actions. According to multiple eyewitness accounts documented in official histories, men with one leg hopped forward on crutches holding grenades. Soldiers with severe wounds crawled toward American lines, pushing rifles ahead of them. The chaos of the band's eye charge produced 3 Medal of Honor recipients whose actions are thoroughly documented in official citations. Lieutenant Colonel William J. O'Brien, commanding the 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry, refused evacuation despite wounds. When Japanese forces overran his command post, he mounted a Jeep-mounted 50-caliber machine gun under fire to direct it against the enemy. After expending all ammunition, he fought with 2 pistols until killed. His body was found surrounded by at least 30 dead Japanese soldiers. His Medal of Honor citation signed by President Truman on May 27, 1945, details his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity. Private Thomas A. Baker, Company A, 105th Infantry, destroyed a Japanese strongpoint with a bazooka, then fought off multiple attacks, personally killing at least 24 enemy soldiers. Severely wounded and unable to walk, he refused evacuation. His famous last words to his comrades were, "Get the hell away from me." When his position was recaptured, Baker was found dead, propped against a tree with an empty .45 pistol in his hand and 8 dead Japanese soldiers around him. Medal of Honor awarded posthumously May 9, 1945. Captain Benjamin L. Salomon, serving as battalion surgeon for the 2nd Battalion, 105th Infantry, was treating wounded when Japanese soldiers entered his aid station. He killed 4 with his rifle, then ordered the wounded evacuated while he covered their withdrawal with a machine gun. His body was found slumped over the weapon, with 98 dead Japanese soldiers in front of his position. He had suffered 76 bullet wounds and 24 bayonet wounds. Due to Geneva Convention questions about medical personnel bearing arms, his Medal of Honor wasn't approved until May 1, 2002. As full daylight came to Saipan at 1000 hours, the full extent of the slaughter became visible. Official body count teams would eventually document 4,300 Japanese dead from the charge. American casualties totaled approximately 1,000 killed and wounded, with the 105th Infantry Regiment essentially destroyed as a fighting unit. The mathematics were stark. The American artillery had fired approximately 12,000 rounds during the 15-hour battle. The fire direction centers had coordinated fires from 18 separate artillery battalions plus naval gunfire support. The system had functioned exactly as designed. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Walt, observing the aftermath, wrote in his official report, "The enemy attacked with great courage, but without modern tactical sense. Our fire support system functioned exactly as designed. The forward observers performed magnificently. The fire direction centers never missed a beat." As the sun climbed higher, American graves registration teams began the grim work of collecting bodies. The scale of death was unprecedented in the Pacific War. Major Edward McCarthy, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 105th Infantry, one of the units that bore the brunt of the attack, described it in his after-action report as looking like a cattle stampede from a Western movie, except the Japanese just kept on coming. Among the American lines, the psychological impact was profound. Many Marines and soldiers had witnessed death before, but nothing on this scale. The systematic destruction of thousands of human beings, no matter how necessary, left deep impressions. Captain Edmund G. Love, the 27th Division historian who would later write extensively about the battle, interviewed survivors immediately after the action. His notes preserved in the National Archives capture the raw emotions. Men who had been through everything were shaken. Not by fear, the Japanese never really had a chance, but by the sheer scale of the killing. The Japanese survivors melted back into caves in northern Saipan. Among them was Captain Sakai Obo, who would lead guerrilla resistance for another 16 months before finally surrendering in December 1945, 3 months after Japan's capitulation. His survival and continued resistance are thoroughly documented in military records, and the book, Obo, The Last Samurai, Saipan 1944 to 1945. General Sato, who had ordered the charge, committed seppuku on July 10, 1944, 3 days after the failed assault. Admiral Toshiro Nagamo, former commander of the Pearl Harbor Attack Force, had already taken his own life on July 6, the day before the charge. Their deaths marked the end of Japanese organized resistance on Saipan. The Battle of Saipan's Banzai Charge showcased revolutionary developments in military technology and doctrine. The Fire Direction Center system, developed at Fort Sill in the 1930s, had transformed artillery from an art to a science. Instead of individual battery commanders making gut decisions, trained specialists used mathematical procedures to optimize every aspect of fire support. The system included graphical firing tables that eliminated complex calculations, standard radio procedures that minimized communication time, and pre-surveyed battery positions accurate to within 1 meter. Meteorological sections provided hourly weather updates, while registration procedures accounted for barrel wear and ammunition variations. Time-on-target missions, a uniquely American capability at the time, demonstrated the pinnacle of this coordination. Multiple batteries would calculate backward from a desired impact time, with guns firing in sequence so all shells arrived simultaneously. This technique, impossible without precise communication and calculation, multiplied the psychological and physical impact of artillery fire. Japanese military leadership had received warnings about American artillery capabilities, but chose to ignore them. Japanese officers who had observed German Wehrmacht operations in Europe had reported on American fire support doctrine. Attachés in neutral countries had forwarded reports about American industrial production of artillery ammunition, millions of rounds per month. Colonel Hiromichi Yajara, operations officer for the Japanese 32nd Army on Okinawa, had studied American tactics and warned against Banzai charges. In pre-war planning sessions, he had argued that massed infantry attacks against modern firepower were suicidal. He was overruled by generals who believed spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage. The Banzai charges revealed fatal flaws in Japanese racial ideology. The belief that Americans were soft, materialistic, and incapable of sustained combat had been drummed into every Japanese soldier. They were told that Americans would break and run when faced with determined Japanese warriors exhibiting Yamato Damashi, the Japanese spirit. This racism cut both ways. American forces, initially terrified by Banzai charges in early battles, had by 1944 come to see them as evidence of Japanese irrationality. The charges reinforced American stereotypes that would influence strategic decisions, including the use of atomic weapons a year later. The American response to Banzai charges, overwhelming firepower rather than countercharges, reflected both tactical wisdom and cultural differences. Americans approached war as a problem to be solved through technology and organization. Japanese approached it as a test of spiritual strength. When these philosophies collided, technology always won. The Saipan Banzai charge represented the culmination of 2 years of American learning and adaptation. In early 1942, American forces had been caught off guard by Japanese tactics. By mid-1944, they had developed specific counter-doctrines that turned Japanese strengths into weaknesses. The evolution was documented in after-action reports. Guadalcanal, August 1942. Enemy night tactics achieved initial success through surprise and aggression. Recommend improved night defensive procedures. New Georgia, July 1943. Coordinated defensive fires broke up most enemy charges. Units with registered artillery support suffered minimal casualties. Tarawa, November 1943. Time on target missions proved highly effective against massed enemy troops. Recommend all FOs be trained in TOTI procedures. Saipan, July 1944. Enemy Banzai attack completely destroyed by coordinated fires. No changes to doctrine recommended. The battle-hardened American troops, who had initially recoiled at the terrifying sight of Japanese soldiers screaming and charging with fixed bayonets, had undergone a profound psychological shift. These attacks no longer seemed like threats to be feared. Instead, they saw them as opportunities, moments when the enemy emerged from cover and presented themselves as targets. The decision by Japanese command to launch the massive Banzai assault on Saipan represented nothing less than a catastrophic failure in military judgment. General Saito understood with brutal clarity that this attack was doomed before it began. His final communications revealed something far darker than military calculation. He viewed this charge not as a tactical operation with realistic objectives, but as a ritual of death, a final act of honor in the face of inevitable defeat. Lieutenant General Holland Smith, who commanded the 5th Amphibious Corps, later reflected on this decision in his memoir with a soldier's bluntness. From any rational military perspective, the Banzai charge was simply insane. The Japanese held formidable defensive positions throughout northern Saipan, fortified in caves and ravines that commanded the terrain. They possessed the option to execute a disciplined fighting withdrawal, one that would have inflicted thousands of American casualties and purchased crucial time for their homeland's defenses. Yet they chose instead to abandon these advantages and move into open ground where American firepower reigned supreme and absolute. The deeper problem lay in Japanese military culture itself. The institution's fundamental inability to adapt to modern industrial warfare stemmed from deeply rooted ideological commitments. Spiritual values and Bushido tradition were prized far above material reality and tactical flexibility. Officers who dared suggest defensive strategies or controlled retreats faced immediate accusation of cowardice. The consequences were devastating, resulting in tactical suicide on a scale almost beyond comprehension. The American artillery apparatus that ultimately annihilated the Saipan Banzai charge represented a leap forward in military technology and coordination. Radio communications formed the nervous system of this system. Forward observers carried SCR-300 and SCR-610 FM radios that delivered crystal-clear communications across the electromagnetic chaos of active combat. These devices operated across ranges of 3 to 5 miles, enabling observers to call fire from multiple batteries simultaneously without delay or confusion. Survey equipment provided unprecedented accuracy in establishing firing positions. American artillery units employed the latest instruments to place batteries into a common grid system. This innovation eliminated the need for complex calculations. Any observer anywhere could call fire from any battery without requiring specialized mathematical work or time-consuming coordination. Meteorological support added another dimension to this technological network. Every artillery regiment maintained a meteorological section that released weather balloons every 6 hours, capturing precise measurements of wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes. This data proved essential for calculating long-range fire solutions. Fire control instruments completed the system's architecture. The M7 graphical firing table and M10 plotting board allowed fire direction centers to track numerous targets and friendly units simultaneously, solving complex firing problems in mere seconds rather than consuming minutes. This combination of technologies, communication systems, survey methods, meteorological data, and fire control instruments created an integrated whole far greater than its individual components. The strategic consequences of destroying the Saipan Banzai charge rippled far beyond the island itself. When news reached Tokyo that over 4,000 soldiers had perished in a single charge while inflicting minimal American casualties, the political shock contributed directly to the collapse of Prime Minister Hideki Tojo's government on July 18, 1944. The fall of Saipan carried even broader implications. American B-29 bombers now stood within 1,250 miles of Tokyo. By November of that year, these aircraft were launching from Saipan's rebuilt airfields to strike directly at the Japanese homeland. Admiral Osami Nagano would eventually acknowledge in stark terms, "Our war was lost with the loss of Saipan." Despite the unmistakable futility demonstrated at Saipan, Japanese forces remained committed to similar tactics. They would launch additional Banzai charges at Guam, Tinian, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Each engagement produced comparable carnage. The institutional refusal to adapt would ultimately consume hundreds of thousands of lives. 9 months after Saipan at Okinawa in May 1945, American counter-Banzai tactics reached their final refined form. When the Japanese 32nd Army launched desperate charges on May 4th, the results exceeded even Saipan's devastation in their totality. 500 Japanese soldiers attacked American positions. Within 6 hours, 4,500 lay dead. American casualties numbered 335. The kill ratio of nearly 15 to 1 illustrated the absolute dominance of coordinated firepower over human wave tactics. By Okinawa, American forces had incorporated additional innovations. Improved white phosphorus shells now served both marking and psychological purposes. Marine and Army artillery units operated with superior integration than before. Continuous wave radar tracked enemy movements during darkness. The technical superiority had become almost overwhelming. The industrialized efficiency of American artillery in destroying these charges forced many American participants to confront uncomfortable truths about modern combat. The mechanical slaughter of courageous soldiers who never had genuine opportunity to succeed troubled many Americans who participated in the killing. Lieutenant Colonel Justice Chambers, whose battalion helped repel the charge, recorded his thoughts in personal papers with evident discomfort. "There is no glory in what we accomplished. We eliminated thousands of brave men who possessed no realistic chance. They sought to kill us, certainly, and yes, the action was militarily necessary. But transforming artillery into an assembly line of death bears no resemblance to warfare as our fathers understood it. The lopsided character of this killing, made possible by American technological sophistication and organizational excellence, introduced an entirely new dimension to warfare. Individual courage meant nothing when confronted by coordinated firepower applied through systematic channels. The artillery methodologies honed through combat with Japanese Banzai charges would reshape military doctrine for decades to come. The fire direction center concept became standard doctrine in every modern military. Time-on-target missions evolved into routine training exercises. Forward observer integration with infantry units transitioned from innovation to established military procedure. 5 years later in Korea, American forces employed these identical techniques to devastate Chinese human wave attacks. At the Battle of Chipyong-ni in 1951, concentrated artillery destroyed an entire Chinese division that attempted a nocturnal assault. The Chinese discovered what the Japanese had learned before them: that courage proved ineffective against coordinated firepower delivered at scale. Vietnam War combat featured additional refinements, including computer-assisted calculations for fire control and helicopters carrying forward observers. The Gulf War in 1991 demonstrated GPS-guided artillery shells. Yet throughout these decades and conflicts, the fundamental principle remained constant from Saipan onward: massed coordinated fires directed by positioned observers. Decades after the battle concluded, American veterans of Saipan reflected upon their experiences. Survivors gathered at the 50th anniversary commemoration in 1994 to remember that horrific morning. Arthur Robinson, a private serving with the 105th Infantry who survived the charge, recalled with evident reluctance, "You must understand, we harbored no desire to annihilate them all, but they continued coming, wave upon wave, and our artillery simply cut them down. It was terrible, but honestly, what alternative remained available?" The mechanical nature of the killing persisted in haunting many who participated. They had achieved victory not through superior bravery or individual skill, but through superior systems and firepower. It represented victory empty of glory, success empty of satisfaction. The destruction of the Japanese Banzai charge on Saipan resulted from a collision between two fundamentally opposed military philosophies. Japanese doctrine held that spiritual fortitude and willingness to sacrifice could overcome any material disadvantage. American doctrine countered that firepower, technology, and systematic organization would invariably defeat human wave assaults. When these opposing philosophies met in combat, the outcome possessed a predetermined quality. The American artillery system, with its forward observers, fire direction centers, time-on-target missions, and integrated communications networks, represented the application of industrial management principles to warfare itself. The Japanese Banzai charge, rooted in samurai tradition and Shinto beliefs regarding honorable death, belonged to a preceding historical era. Deployed against American artillery in 1944, it constituted mass suicide, wearing the uniform of military tactics. The Saipan Banzai charge delivered crucial lessons, though only one side lived to implement them. For Americans, the battle validated their substantial investment in artillery systems and fire control mechanisms. The capacity to concentrate fires from multiple batteries upon a single target within seconds had proven absolutely decisive. For Japan, this lesson arrived too late for meaningful implementation. Some Japanese officers did eventually learn and adapt their approaches. At Iwo Jima and subsequently at Okinawa, commanders like Tadamichi Kuribayashi and Mitsuru Ushijima abandoned large-scale Banzai assaults in favor of defensive campaigns designed to inflict maximum American casualties. These represented exceptions rather than institutional change. The Japanese military hierarchy never formally abandoned the Banzai charge as doctrine. Captain Sakai Oba, who survived by evading the primary assault and conducting guerrilla operations, would later reflect upon that night with painful clarity. "We discovered that courage without technology possesses no meaning in contemporary warfare. The Americans did not defeat our spiritual essence, they simply rendered it irrelevant." The final accounting of the Saipan Banzai charge reveals the cold mathematics of industrial warfare. Japanese killed in action totaled 4,311 confirmed dead. The wounded count remains unknown, though most subsequently perished. Total participants ranged from 4,000 to 4,300. Casualty rates approached 100%. American 1st and 2nd Battalion casualties of the 105th Infantry numbered 406 killed and 512 wounded. 3rd Battalion of the 10th Marines suffered 127 casualties. Total American casualties approximated 1,000 personnel. Engaged units experienced casualty rates approaching 40%. Ammunition expenditure totaled an estimated 12,000 artillery rounds, thousands of mortar rounds, and naval gunfire support delivered 615 major caliber shells in documented instances. Cost-effectiveness calculations suggested roughly 3 artillery shells per Japanese casualty. These numerical accounts narrate a story of industrial efficiency applied systematically to human destruction. Americans had converted warfare into mathematical formula where firepower multiplied by coordination produced victory. The Saipan Banzai charge poses questions maintaining relevance to contemporary military considerations. Does courage retain any place within industrialized combat scenarios? Does technology inevitably negate human elements in warfare? Does the calculated efficiency of killing diminish the humanity of those performing it? Modern American military doctrine, shaped fundamentally by experiences such as Saipan, emphasizes overwhelming firepower and technological supremacy. The objective centers upon achieving victory while minimizing friendly casualties, even if this necessitates massive enemy losses. This methodology has demonstrated effectiveness repeatedly, yet simultaneously raises troubling questions regarding warfare's fundamental nature. The destruction of the Japanese Banzai charge on Saipan represented the conclusive terminus of an entire warfare era. Military forces would never again launch mass infantry assaults against modern firepower with realistic expectations of anything except annihilation. The romantic notion of the charge, cavalry wielding sabers, infantry carrying bayonets, perished upon Tanapag Plain under American artillery bombardment. From the resulting carnage emerged a fundamentally altered understanding of warfare as industrial process. Victory would flow not toward the bravest participants, but toward those commanding superior systems, superior fire control, superior communications, superior logistics. Human elements retained importance, yet remained subordinate to technological and organizational superiority. The Japanese soldiers who charged into American artillery on July 7, 1944, represented among the final soldiers, believing that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantage. Their deaths conclusively proved that in modern warfare, courage without technology proves insufficient. The American artillery system that obliterated them embodied warfare's future, coordinated, calculated, crushingly efficient. The 4,311 Japanese soldiers perishing in the charge demonstrated extraordinary courage. They deserved superior fates than being consumed by the mechanical apparatus of American artillery. Their commanders, however, remained blinded by ideology and tradition, ordering them to die in ways achieving nothing except exposing their tactical doctrine as obsolete. Their sacrifice endures as eternal caution. In modern warfare, courage alone provides insufficient foundation. Technology, organization, and firepower will consistently defeat human waves, regardless of individual bravery. The glorious charge's age terminated on Saipan, extinguished by American artillery that transformed warfare into mathematical equation and mathematics into systematic death. The Banzai charge concept itself was obliterated, revealed as romantic anachronism within industrial warfare's reality. Within Saipan's Valley of Death, courage confronted coordination, spirit encountered system, tradition met technology. Technology prevailed, it invariably does.